afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here in Toronto on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Thank you to Bau-Xi for hosting, and to the ADAC for bringing us together as part of its 60th anniversary programming. I'm Gabby Marcuzzi, founder and host of ArtBeat, and I'm so pleased to be moderating a conversation today on caring for your collection. This afternoon, we'll be talking about what happens after our work enters a collection, how we live with it, care for it, understand it, and help it endure over time. So rather than reading formal bios, as I look to you three, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and share how their work connects with the care of artworks and collections. So Cailin, maybe we'll start with you. Can you tell us a bit about your work at Restorart and the types of questions and collections or concerns that people tend to bring to you?
Okay, hi, I'm Cailin Cser. I am a, can you hear me? Okay, I'm a conservator at Restorart, and so we specialize in the conservation and restoration of a variety of different materials. My specialization is in paper, but we also do canvas, sculpture, heritage interiors, and we serve various clients, public, private, corporate, institutional, friends and family. And so a lot of the questions usually that come to us are, oftentimes it's more when a piece has either been damaged or there is concern of potential damage, and sometimes it is just even helping to consult on preservation. So slowing down deterioration or mitigating deterioration or arresting a damage that has occurred or intervening and fixing the damage.
Danna, I'll turn to you next. Could you share a bit about your advisory work and how you help people build, place, and live with art?
Absolutely, thanks Katie. I'm Danna Heitner. I'm an art advisor in Toronto. I have been dealing with art for just over 30 years.
Woo.
The senior on the group here. And so it's really important actually. So there's all sorts of different collections, but most of all, people coming to fill a space in their home versus a collection are handled kind of two different ways. So when you're filling a space, you know where it's going and you know what to prepare for. But if they're just passionate collectors, you have to deal with that after the acquisition. So there's two different sort of camps.
Great. And Gabby, finally to you. Can you tell us a bit about your role with ADAC's Appraisal Services and how your work connects to collection stewardship and long-term planning?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm Gabby. I'm the appraisal manager at the Art Dealers Association of Canada. So I've worked with many people in the crowd actually probably on appraisals and donations. What I do at ADAC is essentially project management of large and complex donations to museum collections and other public collections, essentially anything that would require a tax receipt or a cultural property certification. So I oftentimes see the collection as a whole coming into a museum or pieces of the collection coming into a museum. So I kind of get a sense of people's collecting practices and sort of how these values draw the collections together. But I don't necessarily work with collections care. I often am kind of seeing the collection at this transitional point, sort of in the state that it's in when it's being donated.
Thank you. So I'd like to start before anything has actually gone wrong. It's a good place to start, right? Because that seems to be where a lot of good collection care really begins. So Cailin, in your experience, what are some of the easiest problems for collectors to prevent and what tends to get missed?
I think for prevention, I mean, there's a lot of, I think it also depends on the material, but in terms of prevention, I think it's always best to start by considering the environment that the object is going to be going into, and then considering, weighing what the material is and what it can handle in an environment. Some are more sensitive than others, some require different environments. So considering the environment first, and the object, and what it can withstand. For example, watercolors are more sensitive. You want to keep them further away from light. Certain objects can handle certain things. I mean, there's the porcelain piece here, if that falls on the ground, that shatters. But if a paper armor falls on the ground, it doesn't shatter, right? So there are just different things to consider. And in terms of things that get missed, I think often our clients they often don't miss a lot. Oftentimes they find out what they miss when they come to us.
Got it.
But I think sometimes maybe the best thing to think about is framing. I think good framing is sometimes overlooked, and framing itself can cause damage in the long term. And so considering that ahead of time, and making sure that the frame is going to protect the piece as opposed to be decorative.
Right. And Danna, when you're advising on where a work should go, where do those practical considerations show up in the decisions that you're making?
They have to show up initially, right at the beginning. As I said, there's two different camps. So one is after the acquisition, if they're just passionate collectors, and we find a safe space for it. Otherwise, if they're looking for a specific location, then if it's a huge wall of windows, works on paper are not really recommended. There's certain mediums that are stronger and better to have in that space. And then, as Cailin was saying, there's precautions. There's good glazing that you can choose, large scale, plexi, UV protecting glazing. You can also further put protection on the windows themselves. Not only, it could be invisible, it could be through, there's a great 3M product that you could add another layer of UV protection, or blinds, but people tend to not keep blinds down all the time. So the location's always important, and so it starts there, and then it starts with also the transportation, traffic. Traffic, who's gonna bump into it.
Right.
On stairs, is it protruding too much? All different considerations.
And Gabby, when you're assessing a work, can you usually tell when it has been cared for well over time?
Definitely. I think I'm lucky that I work with institutional collections, because typically by the time an appraisal reaches me, it's already been accepted as a donation, or at least accepted as a proposed donation. And museums have the luxury of being very particular about what works they want to accept. So usually the works have been well cared for, but there are some cases where a work is so important that maybe it hasn't been as well cared for, but it's still advantageous for the museum to collect it. But you can definitely tell the difference. I mean, you can see immediately. Usually when something is faded, when something has acid burn from a mat for prior framing, if something has been handled improperly, and all of those things do impact the value of a work. And past conservation treatments that haven't been done well, especially sort of 19th century and early 20th century conservation, they sort of stand out, and they can be quite glaring, and nobody's happy when the value is lower than you expect. So you can definitely tell, and it has implications.
Great, so that leads nicely into the materials themselves, because not every work is asking the same thing from a collector. So Cailin, are there certain materials or mediums, I know you mentioned paper before, that collectors tend to underestimate in terms of fragility or long-term care?
I think oftentimes they don't underestimate it, but sometimes I do find that certain collectors will actually steer clear of certain materials because they don't understand it, or they are concerned about its fragility, and that can often be works on paper, and that can come in the form of prints, drawings, watercolors, and photographs too. Photographs are also quite sensitive to photo oxidation, light exposure, and I think because there are so many different varieties of different kinds of artworks on paper, sometimes collectors, if they're not interested in that material, they'll stay away from it, also because of its fragility. And I mean, canvas paintings oftentimes can be, more robust. Sometimes there's a sacrificial varnish layer on it. But then you have like the Jack Bush, which is, you know, it's a very fine wash of pigment on there, and you know, a scratch up against it is going to make a huge difference in the same way that it would with if you bumped up against a watercolor. So there are major generalizations to say that paper is more sensitive, but yeah, I don't know if I answered that. I sort of danced
You
around
did.
it. Okay, great.
Thank you. And Danna, does the medium ever change how you think where a work should be placed and installed? I know you mentioned windows before. Any other considerations to make?
There's a lot of considerations.
Tell us, please. Tell us everything.
Aside of light, there's also traffic, like we were saying. So a scratch is something that people don't usually think about. So high traffic areas where they get narrower, stairs, you don't realize that people can brush against it. What else? One of the big problems also with works on paper, I find, from my end, is that people are very interested. They like photographs, they like works on paper. They're often a great entry point for clients. That being said, they don't like to spend the extra money on glazing to protect it. So I right now have a client who has a box of works on paper that we're disagreeing on how to frame them.
Yeah.
Because the glazing is quite more expensive than regular glazing, but it does make a huge difference. I mean, not only in its protection, but also in its appreciation, because if you can't see it, what's the point?
And then there's also the non-reflective.
The non-reflective is what I'm talking about, exactly.
Yeah,
If you can't see it, what
Right,
is
that's
the
the
point?
key, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there's that, and then there's other things like changing temperatures affect things.
Wow, I would not have thought of that.
Things about people touching it, like some people like to put a wonderful piece of art in the middle of their table, and it's going to constantly maybe be moved. So you have to think about that. How's it going to be moved? Where is it going to be moved? Who's going to move it? Can it be moved? Is it safe to move it? Is it multiple pieces? So it's really endless, and it's very specific to each piece and situation, I guess.
And Gabby, does the medium or condition of a work affect how someone should be thinking about appraisal, insurance, future planning?
For sure. So yeah, I mean, in terms of insurance appraisals and estate planning appraisals, if a work is particularly valuable, you definitely want to know the value of the work as current as you can get it. For works that are particularly very valuable, it's probably worth the money to pay and have a professional appraisal done. For works in, I would say, average people's collections, that may be worth the same as what a professional appraiser would charge, keeping good records might suffice, but knowing the value, even generally, of the works that you have in your collection is extremely important, because you never know what's going to happen, and especially if the work is maybe fragile, if it's in a high traffic area, if you have it temporarily in a frame that doesn't have the proper glazing on it, anything can happen at any time, and when you do those insurance claims, you don't want to be scrambling to get a retroactive appraisal at that point.
This is bringing us into the reality of living with art. Danna, so
Can I
here,
ask you a question just before?
I guess.
I think one of the things that people are curious about is they create a collection, they get it appraised for insurance purposes, and then they hold on to it for years.
Mm-hmm.
So how often would you say an updated appraisal would be required?
Ooh.
It really depends on the work and the market of the artist. A lot of works, I would say most works, don't rapidly increase in value to the point where you need to be constantly updating appraisals every few years. But for something like David Hockney just passed away, if a collector had a major work by David Hockney, that might be something that you potentially want to look at getting revalued by an appraiser who understands the market and who's aware of maybe how the artist's death could affect the values. But I think for most works, there's not really a set time, but current enough that if you had to do something like an insurance claim or an estate disposition, it's not like an appraisal from the 1980s where the market has shifted so much that that appraisal would essentially be of no value to a current person looking at it.
We also had, and this is a special case scenario, but we had a piece come in that was damaged.
and the client wanted it appraised prior to conservation, and then they're gonna want it appraised after conservation. So that appraiser is gonna work quite closely with us in that, which is another example.
Yeah, I would say also if you're planning something like a major move where you're going to be moving your collection, like if you're moving to another province, you're going to be shipping everything over, rehanging it. If you can afford to have a full collection appraisal done, that might be a good time to do it as well. Just because if anything were to happen in transit, if that truck gets lost, maybe that's the catalyst to get an updated appraisal.
I'll let you drink water, Cailin. I have a follow-up question. Yes. So, this is out of my curiosity, why after conservation as well?
Okay, so the damages, without getting too specific, so there were damages that were caused that the piece needs to be stabilized. So in its current state, it does have a lesser value because it is unstable and it is prone to loss and damage, and there is actual significant loss to the work. After conservation, then it gets reappraised, and the appraiser would look at the stabilization. So is it stable? Is it prone to loss? Is it fragile? And on the other side of conservation, it wouldn't be. It would be stabilized, and then the reintegration of some of those damages, and then the appraiser can then be like, this image is now stable. It has its damages have been reintegrated and treated, and so that's where that would come in.
Thank you for satiating my curiosity. And Danna, because you asked a question, I'm looking at you. Uh-oh. So since you're often helping people make art feel at home for them, how do you balance the client's vision with what the work itself needs? Because what I just heard is a whole list of things you have to think about if somebody wants to put something on a table. So how do you balance that from your expertise versus what they want to do? How do you influence and get their buy-in to do what you want to do?
It's a good question, but it's actually not about me. It's about what they want to do. And once they own the art, once it's in their possession, they really can do whatever they want. My job is only to advise them and advise what a better condition would be or where to take precautions. But in the end, it's up to them. And they just need to be informed, really. If they want to move it on and off the table every single meal, that is fine with me.
This sounds like a real life example, perhaps.
There are several. I've been doing this a long time. But it really is, it's up to them. And all you can do is advise them, let them know, inform them, and then let them make the decision. Once it leaves the gallery, once it leaves the artist studio, it's in the world. It's up to them on how they deal with it. There's options on, not everybody is interested in the financial future of the art per se, but just to live with it and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what's most important, and you want it to last, not break, not get damaged, not fade. But in the end, it's up to them.
And Cailin, anything from your perspective where you would say, I'd reconsider that?
Watercolors in bright rooms or indirect light. Anything that is indirect light, even an oil painting, anything where the direct sun is hitting any artwork is just find a hole in a wall somewhere else. Or shades or whatever, but any direct sunlight is going to be, not only is it photo-oxidative degradation, but you're also getting buildup of heat. So, it's just, that is the best thing. I think I always reconsider that. I think that's the biggest one for me. And bathrooms, obviously, that's a pretty easy one to avoid. I think it's more just about advising clients that you can put it there, but here are the risks, and at your peril, hang it where you wish, but give them the information to make the right choice, or not the right choice, that sounded wrong, but an informed decision. Your choice. Choose what you want to hang, where you want to hang it, and I think under vents, on top of fireplaces. That's more for private collections, and then with corporate collections, it's more like if you're gonna have artwork in a boardroom, be aware of maybe not putting a tanabe right where the food counter is in the boardroom. There's food splash and there's this and that. So I think it really is about advising them where to put it at, so that it is at the least amount of risk possible. Yeah, and I think just one thing about UV glazing, because it's on my mind, but the UV glazing, it does, I have to say it's amazing, and it does filter out the UV radiation, so it's filtering out a wavelength of light that is only damaging on the artwork. So the UV is not helping us to see the artwork, and so some genius was like, let's just filter that out, it's not helping. But it can sometimes cause a false sense of security that you can hang your artwork in bright places, and that's just not the case. It's really there to to protect it for its preservation long term, but the light itself will cause the fading. It's not really the UV that's causing the fading. Just had to put that out there.
So, yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, and so Danna, back to you for a second. So sorry, love you. So changing framing, talk about using different glass, glazing. What about like adjusting the lighting? Like Cailin just said, just light is actually an issue as well. Does that like help rethink the placement altogether, or use make adjustments where possible?
Well, I mean, the positioning of artwork is really, I think, in my mind, very important. So I think that there's sometimes some decisions that have to be made, some changes that have to be made to accommodate the art. It depends on, how far they're going to go. One of the things that's really important is people cleaning the art is another issue. So I believe one of the questions you had was about residential or corporate collections.
Just jumping ahead on it here.
Well, the reason why I mention it is because it's not so much the different concerns, but there's people who are cleaning, they're dusting or wiping down the glass. People take Windex to glazing. No. Exactly. So there's certain things and people don't realize they're doing it, or things that hit the floor in corporate collections. They use those high.
Oh, like the
high speed steam cleaning, or the big things that clean the floors. And they bang into the walls. So I mean, we had one piece that was meant to sit on the floor, and so we had to build a false baseboard and have it painted out to look like part of the frame in order to elevate it off the floor so that the painting wouldn't get damaged. So there's lots of accommodations. Lighting, of course, is one of them. Proper installation. Where are you going to view it? Should it have cleats? Should it have D-rings? Does it have to sit flush against the wall? So there's so many considerations related to the environment, and often, adjustments are required. Not always, but often.
It sounds very creative what you do.
I like to be creative.
And Gabby, do display choices ever change how a work or collection is understood over time?
That's a really interesting question. I don't often get to see the work sort of in situ in a collector's home before it's donated. Usually I'm seeing the work or photographs of the work sort of in the collection storage or wherever it may be on its way to the institution. So I often don't get the privilege of seeing how the collector has sort of physically arranged the collection, but I definitely do see how the collection I think would come together and the vision of the collector. I don't know if that answered your question, but
of course it did. So there's something, I'm hearing a lot about balance. Art is obviously meant to be seen and lived with, but the way that we live with it can shape its future. So Gabby, back to you. Yay! So for collectors, especially if a work may eventually be sold, insured, donated, or passed on, what needs to live in the file behind the artwork?
This I encounter every day, and my answer is as much documentation as you have, save everything. It doesn't even have to be physically in the back if you can't fit it in an envelope behind the frame, just keep it in a file. The most important is where did you buy it and what did you pay for it? And when you bought it, if it was on the secondary market, did you receive any provenance or information about the work? Definitely save that. I more often than not see collections where the documentation hasn't been kept, and then the collector realizes too late that they actually forget what they paid for it. And you would be surprised like you think I'm gonna remember this moment forever, and then you don't remember where you got it or what you paid for it. So save as much as you can, and if you don't have a physical invoice anymore, write down what you remember, and just put that instead. And that's, any information is helpful, but as much as possible.
Danna, I see you raising your microphone.
Well, because it's something that I deal with over the years, is that I really try and encourage clients to either keep a designated file at minimum with every information. I mean, there's some dealers that provide a tremendous amount of information that's useful to keep with the artwork. Cataloging is also highly recommended. Not if you have 6 pieces, you can keep a file, but generally when you get into larger collections, especially corporate collections, I think it's very important to catalog them and to keep that information together, because when you're faced with deaccessioning or wanting to sell something and they can't remember anything about it, or it's been framed and it's covered up and you can't see any details, then you have to start really investing in exploring that, and it ends up costing more money than cataloging it initially. So I highly recommend that.
And what sort of trouble does that lead to later on for a collector if they don't do this?
I mean, worst case scenario, it can have implications for authentication, for especially secondary market works. If you were to buy like a William Corellic and you've lost all of the documentation, it would be definitely easier to maybe dispute the authenticity of that work. And then it may also have implications for donations, that a museum potentially would have questions about, we can't verify where you bought this, for historical works as well. When you've bought it, imported it, or you're planning to export it, you would need all of that information for permits. But for appraisals also, it could and probably would have an impact on the value if you don't remember what you paid for it or what exhibitions it might have been in. If the appraiser doesn't know that, and I do my best always to research, but if I'm not able to find the information, it can impact my appraisal. So it's in everyone's best interest to save as much as you can.
Provenance definitely affects quite a bit down the road. And even at the initial stage, there could be so many fakes. If you start thinking about works on paper that have been very popular, I'm going to not mention any artists' names, but there's a lot.
Why not, Dan?
There's a lot of duplications, and the best way to sometimes authenticate it immediately is provenance. Where did it come from? Where'd you buy it?
And Danna, do you see clients approach this differently depending on whether it's a private, corporate, institutional collection?
Yeah, the clients approach it all different ways. I mean, as many clients as there are many different ways to approach it. So I don't find that there's been a lot of consistency overall between corporate or private collections. I think that some people are more interested in keeping it together and highly value the records. And others are just, I want to live with what I'm going to enjoy, and that's pretty much it. But down the road, there's so many times that it does affect it, whether you're moving, passing it on in your family, a divorce, wealth management. So there's so many reasons to keep good records, because a lot of people treat art as regular chattels, and art is a different class.
And Cailin, when a work comes to you for assessment or treatment, does having a clear history change how you approach it?
Yes. Yes and no. If there's a stain on something, for example, I'm just using an example. If there's a stain on an artwork, let's say a print, and it comes in, and I know what it is, I can target my stain reduction a little bit better. If I know if it was from a burst pipe, potentially it has metal ions in it, I can target my staining to work with that. Is it coffee? Is it blood? There are.
Was there a murder before?
there are so many different things, and also previous treatments. Some of the hardest treatments for us to do are retreating past treatments, because we don't know what was used. Did somebody use a chlorine bleach on an artwork, and now I have to target my cleaning to make sure it's not going to react with the chlorine that's now in the paper that shouldn't be in the paper. So a lot of the times, though, it's a guessing game. So a lot of the times it's just test, and see what it is, and eventually we get there. sometimes we know what has happened to it. Most of the time we don't.
Okay. So some of the most important care may not be visible on the wall. This is a question for all of you. How does care change depending on the kind of collection we're talking about? Again, private, corporate, institutional, inherited, potentially donated. I'll throw it up for grabs.
All right, I'll speak to corporate versus private. So corporate collections are not necessarily owned by any particular individuals, so those people can come and go and it still stays with the partnership or the corporation. So records are more important there because they'll get passed on. So cataloging of corporate collections, I think, is just part of the drill. So I think that really makes a difference, whereas in private collections, people again are doing as they do and living as they live. It's when something becomes very valuable that it becomes a real concern. Or if they've accumulated a lot of artwork and it's become a tremendous collection and they want to pass it on, and then it becomes a major concern. But records are important.
Yeah, I think speaking to the museum and institutional collections, most of the clients that I work with have an extraordinarily high standard of care for the artworks, just like legally as well, especially for public museums. They take it very seriously when something is accessioned into the collection. Rather than a private collector, I mean, it would be horrible, but you can kind of do whatever you want with it, like even to the point of destroying a work. It's not illegal. But in an institutional collection, the standard of care is so high, and it can face like some kind of interesting challenges for appraisal work, but also it's to benefit the artwork in the long term. So,
Cailin, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how many, I guess this is a question. How many conservation reports have you guys seen? Like, in terms of treatment, like, when a piece follows, like, when you get a piece that has either documentation or cataloging and you're going through everything, all the records, do you ever get treatment reports as to what was done?
Very rarely. I get a lot of reports from conservators, but like museum conservators who are examining and making their best kind of educated judgments on what's been done to the piece. But I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've seen a conservation report that was not done as part of the donation process.
I think I've seen one in over 30 years. There's sometimes a disclosure as to any sort of damage. Finally, on the secondary market, you kind of see that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. On the primary market, you might just hear that there's a damage and we can have it repaired for you if you'd like. Mm-hmm. But conservative, no reports.
Yeah, so I was like, I think I wouldn't expect them necessarily in a change of hands, but sometimes for corporate collections or private clients, I guess my advice potentially, especially if it's private, if it's a painting that you really enjoy and you've had it treated, and you want to keep it and you're interested in the value of it, keep the report. I mean, the conservators, it is our duty to, give a condition report, a treatment proposal, and a cost estimate, and then from there, in the invoice, there is a treatment report as to what was used, what was done, what materials were used, all that kind of stuff. And if it is your private piece and you're interested in spending many years with it or passing it along, keeping that report can be very useful.
Is there a reason why someone wouldn't do a report? Just thinking, Danna, you've only seen one.
Well, it's not that they wouldn't do a report, they just don't necessarily keep it.
Yeah.
I see, okay.
So once it's repaired, once it's been, I think that, they just think it's enough is enough. But you really are only concerned about it once you're selling it or deaccessioning it. So it's not when it's being held so much. Mm-hmm. But I do really believe that if that is part of the piece, if there has been a repair, if there is something, I think that that's part of keeping proper records. Because it does affect the value, and just as much as provenance, it tells you about the piece, and it does help with future appraisals, donations, and restoration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because some things require certain solubility parameters. So, yeah, so if you know that it was painted with a certain technique or whatever, you can either reverse it or retreat it, and anyway, it's an option.
I just thought people were trying to be sneaky. And another question for all three of you. So are there things that private collectors can learn from institutional collection care, even on a smaller scale?
I think the record keeping is probably the biggest one. I've personally been very influenced by the way that I see institutions keeping their records and the sorts of things that they save. Even like ephemera, like cards, if I visit a show and if I buy a piece, I make sure that I take every material that is available to take at that show, all the invitation card, catalog, whatever I can kind of get my hands on and keep that. That's definitely something like that museums and archives do as a practice, and I would for sure encourage anyone who's collecting, even if you're not spending a lot of money, if you go to an artist studio and you buy a small piece, ask the artist, like, do you have like anything that I can kind of take away that can live with this piece?
You should ask for a certificate of authenticity.
Yes, and that, yes.
For three-dimensional works or for anything you're buying that doesn't have a proper invoice.
Anything to add, Cailin? You can say no, it's fine.
No.
But you know, institutions also give you a nod to how to display the art. So the more you see the more art you see, the more you understand. But the institutions do take pride and care in their display of the artwork, and they definitely consider the amount of light and glazing, and it is very important. So that is definitely somewhere where you can start to see how to present your art.
So the question of what happens over time also matters when something unexpected happens to a work. Cailin, when a work is damaged, what is the very first thing that someone should do?
I think it depends on the damage. If it's a flood or something, if it's water damage, as best as you can, remove it from the situation. Don't leave it in, and if you feel comfortable, take it out of the frame and let it sort of dry out. But if it's something like a tear or a break or something that isn't going to develop mold or something like that, don't touch it. Just call a conservator. We had a piece that had a photograph that had fallen off the wall and the glass had shattered. And I asked the client, "Are you comfortable unframing it?" And she's like, because I hadn't seen it. And she said, "No, I'm not." And I went and I showed up and I unframed it and we brought the piece back. But it was good that she didn't, because the glass had really, I think if she had tried, it would have torn further. So she sort of just stopped, gave us a call, and asked what she should do from there. So I think usually the best scenario is don't do anything. Call somebody that you can trust their opinion on how to move forward.
What about some things that people definitely should not do?
Treat it themselves. I mean, it's sometimes it's harder for them, the conservator, to come in and reverse it.
You can't fix a tear?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's objects where they sort of glue it together, but they glue it together with epoxy and then or something like that, and then that glue has very poor solubility parameters. So then the conservator has to sort of shave away the glue in order to get to the original break and that kind of stuff. So because we as conservators, we're using conservation grade materials that are meant to be retreatable, so it makes it easier down the road should something happen. Somebody can retreat it without actually damaging the artwork itself. And I think when there's a lot of personal intervention or sort of not, it comes from a good place, but it's an uneducated intervention, it can cause more harm than good.
And so how do you determine whether the goal is restoration, stabilization, or simply preventing further deterioration?
I think we're always trying to prevent further deterioration. I think that is sort of just always part of the mandate. It is an unnatural job. Everything is going to deteriorate at a certain rate, and we just have to use some tools to sort of mitigate or slow down degradation. Conservation, the difference between conservation and restoration, like when to restore it, I think it's very object dependent. Like some clients actually like to live with some of the damage or the age and all of this kind of stuff. So it's a sliding scale. I think you always want to stabilize an artwork so that it's not going to be at risk of further damage or what have you. But And of course, tears and breaks and all that kind of stuff, often you want to repair that or restore it. But I think in terms of some of the more historical pieces, it does become a major conversation about what should be left and what should stay. And I think that is a really important discussion when the object is just in front of you and the client's there. Because sometimes, you'll want to go a little bit further, a little bit less, and it depends what the damage is. So.
We just got our 10-minute warning. Are you all enthralled?
There's a member question.
I do have a funny story about placement of art.
Please do.
So one of the things, let's say there's a heavily painted oil painting. So that's going to have a scent for quite some time. So I can tell you a recent story where we installed it in a bedroom.
Oh no.
It is still off-gassing in a different location. Thankfully a large home. But there are things like that to consider also, which is not something that we discussed. Materiality could have other side issues.
So where would you say that your roles often end up intersecting?
I often am kind of the last person to see the collection as it leaves a private collector or a corporate collector's home or office. So I think usually both of you would have kind of seen it earlier in its life cycle. But depending on what the appraisal process is, we might be working with a conservator on what treatment has been done, what needs to be done, how will that potentially impact the value, as well as your work building up the collection and how that might impact what museum it might go to, what might be donated, and sort of how the collection is going to be interacting with the space and with the other works that are already in that museum, even if we're never talking face to face.
Yeah, I don't think it's linear. I think our relationships often sort of ebb and flow together in sort of unique ways, and sometimes it starts with the art advisor, sometimes it starts with the appraiser, and sometimes it starts with the conservator, and then we call each other in as needed, but I do think it's just not linear.
Yeah, it's about resources and knowing when to ask for, professional help and guidance and assistance and make informed decisions.
So for someone here who has artwork at home, whether it's a meaningful piece or a larger collection, what is one thing you wish every collector would start doing tomorrow or today?
Enjoy it.
Great answer.
Yeah, enjoy it. We always say, especially with ADAC, and our members all say this as well, that you should buy a work because you love it, not because you think you're going to make money on it. That's an added bonus if you do, but yeah, you own the work because you're going to enjoy it, so.
And I do operate with the mantra, it matters what you surround yourself with, and I encourage people to love what they live with and live with what they love. So I really think that those are very important things, and as an aside, keep good records.
Great, Mac, I wrapped up early, where are you? Oh no, we're gonna do audience Q&A though.
Oh.
Yeah. We're not done with you yet. So we're going to open it up to audience questions now. I know we've covered quite a bit here, so please feel free to ask questions about any part of the conversation. Do something practical, professional. I see hands already, that's amazing. Yes, go ahead.
Gabby, you were talking about the process of appraising for private collectors to donate to a museum. What does that process actually look like, and what are the benefits to the private collector?
For me, usually I work directly with the institution, and that's more just to maintain sort of an arm's length distance not necessarily with the collector, but usually the museum wants someone to come in that's fully impartial. I don't know the collector, and I just sort of receive all of the information. But in terms of benefits to the collectors, the sort of tangible benefit is that you get a good tax receipt when you donate, particularly if the works that you're donating are eligible for cultural property certification. But anytime you donate anything that's worth over $1,000, whether it's just a regular non-cash charitable donation to a foundation or to a hospital or something, or if it's to the AGO, you do need to get it appraised. So all private collectors that have given donations, some of whom may be in the audience that I've worked with, it's to your advantage to get a professional appraisal, because then you will get the best value and the most well-researched value.
They are timely though, right? There are certain times, institutions review and have called, so there is a specific timing that's required to consider.
Yeah, definitely. Usually you want to get the appraisal done quite close to when you're making the donation, because I've seen it happen where someone will get an appraisal and then the donation goes through 3 years later and then they have to pay for a new appraisal because the market's changed.
But also when you can donate to institutions, they also have, that's what I was, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All kinds of factors about whether your institution you're donating to is a qualified recipient of the donation, if they can issue you a charitable tax receipt, or if they can apply on your behalf for a cultural property certification, and that works on a quarterly schedule. So you definitely want to time your donation. If you're looking for a cultural property tax certificate, make sure that the meeting of the committee is going to be before the tax deadline for that year, otherwise you're going to get kicked forward into the next year.
I saw more hands before. Yes.
I'm wondering if the panel could talk more about storage. And, as I think everyone here is growing their collection, not every piece is going to be on display in their private or even a corporate setting.
Great question.
Well, there's off-site storage that you could, there's some that have opened up in the city, and you should look for where it's been properly, the environment is proper, the temperature is proper. And then in your home, there are all different ways. We have some people here who I know do store it in their homes, and there's great racks, but it depends on your space. But you should make sure that the environment is consistent, the temperature is correct, and that it's being handled properly.
And then wrapped properly in sort of a pH neutral materials and
keep your records.
If you take anything away today, it's records. Anything else to add, Gabby?
I think that covers it.
Okay. Anyone? Yes, please.
With respect to conservator work, when does it pay not to go ahead? Right? It must be very expensive to do repairs and cleaning on various artwork. And you may have personal appreciation for something that may have no value to anybody else. So, sort of, when do you decide to go ahead?
That decision is always with the client. So but
like, is there a dollar value where it makes sense? Like if the painting, you bought it for $5,000 many years ago, and you've never heard of that artist again since then, and there's some damage. Do you go through research to see if in fact there is any value to the market?
I'm gonna answer that without, I think that, in the end, it's sentimental value.
Yeah.
So like anything that gets damaged that you own, you have to decide. I think first and foremost, that's the most important consideration when people are looking at conserving, storing, installing, enjoying their art. I think it's really about that. The investment side of it and the other side of donations and all that is secondary. So it really does stand with the owner of the art, the client, who has to make that decision. Nobody can make that for you. Because if you bought it for $500 and it has not increased in value whatsoever, but it has been in your family for years, it means the most important thing to you, it speaks to you, then it's up to you to decide what you can and cannot afford to restore it. But there's access, then the big question is, can it be restored? So in the end, I really think that unfortunately nobody can answer that question for you.
And I have one more question. Today you've talked about art in the sense of sculpture, paintings, works on paper. Would these comments you've made apply to fabrics to carpets?
Absolutely. That's just not my area of specialty. I don't have a lot of experience with textiles. I think just to go back to just the question of when, like, if a conservator can weigh in on that, it is a little unethical, I think, for a conservator to sort of steer a client's hand to move forward with the work. I mean, that would be a bit of a conflict of interest to be like, oh, yes, you should do it and pay me. So I think that really does need to lay with the client and, if anything, an art advisor or an appraiser, because the conservator is really just there to do the work should you want to do it. And I think if we were to say, yeah, you should do it, that becomes awkward. So I think the conservator should really never be the person to decide on that, unless it is at risk of like destruction or loss.
I have a little add-on as well. From sort of collections that I've seen in my work with ADAC, especially for cultural property donations that have to be appraised no matter what the value. Something could be worth $1 on the market, but if a museum is collecting it, then we'll appraise it. And in those cases, oftentimes the cost of getting an appraisal, the cost of conserving the work in the museum collection, and the staff time that goes into accessioning the work into a collection could be far and above the sort of the monetary market value of the work, but it's often the case for things that have like such great cultural significance that just may not actually have a market. So definitely I would say like that the monetary value may not always and often doesn't reflect the importance of the piece, either to the collector or sort of culturally as a whole.
More questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for this very interesting presentation.
You're very welcome.
So, I'm an insurance broker, and I'm wondering how many of you, how many of your clients ask you about insurance, and how many of them might have insurance. And I was very pleased to hear, by the way, the focus on record keeping, because without record keeping, it doesn't really matter how well the collection is looked after if the policy is going to pay out, because there is simply no records.
I guess I'll address that.
Yes, I think it's you.
I always recommend insurance. There's certain, and I speak to coverage a little bit, different benefits that you have from certain coverage, from certain suppliers of coverage. And I find that a lot of them stay with their financial institutions for insurance coverage. Unless they have a very designated specific collection, and then they look to insurers that deal specifically with art collections as a focus.
Right,
But it always comes up, it's always a recommendation.
And what is your sense as far as your customers actually having a specialized fine art policy, as opposed to them having something just on their homeowner's policy, for example?
I always think that it should be very specific to the collection. There are some collections that are vast enough to have designated policy. Sometimes there's only a couple pieces that have a high value, and maybe a blanket statement is more appropriate. So it's really done but it's always addressed, but it's always done per case scenario.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, please, go ahead.
I collect great indigenous artist acrylic paintings. So 2 quick questions. Acrylic, you mentioned and other techniques. What specifically I should look to protect my acrylic paintings? And the other one is, I'm relatively new in the country. I'm from Europe, so I would say I'm double white. I collect a late Inuit artist. There's ethical questions here. Is there an organization, hopefully indigenous organization, I could go and talk about this side of the story, that I have a decent collection of indigenous artists painting, the ethical guidance. There's a place I can go and ask.
I'll just plug a little bit actually. So ADAC, if you visit our Instagram and if you click the link in our bio, we do have sort of a folder of resources for more geared toward Indigenous dealers of Indigenous art in Canada and people who exhibit Indigenous art, but definitely recommendations from the Canadian Museums Association and other arts organizations that have been prepared in consultation with Indigenous groups that definitely have some really incredible guidance on how to display it, how to care for it, how to catalog it, that might be of interest for sure to a collector as well as an institution.
And for the acrylic for display, is it framed?
Yes.
Is it behind glass, or is it just a canvas? No. Yeah. Okay. Is it thick paint, or is it sort of a thin wash of acrylic?
It's both, but none of them behind glass, but professionally framed.
Okay, great. I mean, they're quite robust. I wouldn't overthink it too much. I would make sure that it's not in, I mean, some of the things that we had already sort of discussed, like just, don't keep it in a high light level environment. No direct sunlight, especially with acrylics, they can sort of become a bit soft, depending on the period. High traffic areas, just, not bumping into it. As best you can away from sort of vents and doors and things like that, anywhere where you're getting a lot of like fluctuation in temperature and humidity. And I mean, not above fireplaces. I think really, I wouldn't overthink it too much unless you have a very big concern that you're hanging in the wrong spot. I think it will most likely be okay if it's, yeah.
I saw another hand somewhere. Yes, please.
Yes. Hi. A key takeaway is the importance of finding professional appraisal and early as possible in the process. What should one look for in finding a professional appraiser?
Oh, that's a great question. There are professional organizations of appraisers. So the organization where I trained is the International Society of Appraisers, and I believe that they're the largest. They have a pretty robust Canadian chapter, but depending on your type of collection, you may need to go outside of Canada to find a qualified appraiser. I would say the ISA is excellent. There's also country-specific appraisers organizations in Canada, in the US, all across the world. There's also appraisers that don't belong to organizations but are still very qualified. I would say sometimes if you have no familiarity with that person, if you've never worked with them before, definitely really vet their credentials. But if you were to visit like many of our ADAC member galleries, most of our members don't belong to a professional association of appraisers, but they belong to ADAC, which is a professional association of art dealers, and when they present themselves as appraisers, it's part of sort of the ethical guidelines that they adhere to as ADAC members, that they're not misrepresenting the services that they offer to provide. So I would say the easiest answer is probably look for those professional organizations, but also ask to see their credentials and ask them about, are you familiar with the artist? Have you appraised works by this artist before? You can ask them to see kind of a CV or a professional bio. And any, I would say, good and honest appraiser, which is most of them, will be happy to give you that information because it's pretty much ethical rule number one is you don't ever appraise something that you're not qualified, so.
I think we have time for one more question. Mac, I love you. One more question if somebody has it. Yes.
Yeah, I'm intrigued about fireplaces. I can't tell you how many homes, mine included, where we live in older homes. Fireplaces are usually in our living rooms where we have our best art, and you often see great art over fireplaces. And nobody does anything. I don't do anything. None of my friends talk about this. We don't, and we light a fire maybe 5 times a year. Okay, is that a problem?
I love the justification. 5 times a year only.
I mean, it is, if you think about the painting being right against a wall that's getting really hot, I mean, it does increase deterioration mechanisms. You can also get fluctuating that's happening, so you can also, the painting can end up cracking. I mean, look, if you have a painting that's above your fireplace and you haven't had any problems and you look at it all the time and you're fine with it, then fine. But I mean, it's like, I mean, again, it can be a risk. And also you're getting a lot of heat that's coming out, you're getting soot and smoke, and I mean...
No, but it doesn't come out, no, in a fire. You've been in homes with, there's no soot coming out. it's behind the wall.
Sure.
And the wall
Possibly
doesn't,
fine
and the
part
wall
of
doesn't
where
get
my brain
hot.
goes.
The wall, and the wall doesn't get hot over
Okay.
But
fireplaces.
the environment does.
Yeah.
Like around it does
Yeah.
get fairly hot, even if it is in the back of the
Yeah.
wall, it's
Yeah.
true. But the environment does get it. You could, have flames or, or maybe just the heat from an electric fireplace. So it's just, generally speaking, it's not stable. But,
Yeah.
but again.
But if you see no
do-
cracking, you say there's no problem. You don't see anything.
I would monitor it, if I'm honest. Like, if I really wanted a piece above my fireplace and I was like, that's where I wanna hang it, I would hang it and I would monitor it and I would make sure that it's fine. And just keep looking at it and seeing if it's okay.
What should I look for? Cracking?
This is sometimes why the advice is to not hang above the fireplace, but because yes, it can sometimes take an expert's eye to tell you whether or not that there's damage occurring.
Right.
Right, so it could be cracking, it could be loss, it could be, most of the time it's cracking because it's drying and then humidifying, right?
Right.
Like it's drying out and oftentimes the canvas is shrinking at a different rate than the paint is, and then you get cracking. So, yeah, I mean, keep your eye on it. I don't know. I don't know the painting. I don't know the context. Like, I'm advising blind here. So
It's great advice, Cailin. All right, well, thank you so much to Cailin, Gabby, and Danna for such a thoughtful conversation. I think what came through beautifully today is that caring for a collection is not about perfection or fireplaces. It's about paying attention, asking good questions, and making thoughtful decisions so the work can continue to live well over time. Just wanted to make a quick note, if you're in the area this afternoon, around 4 p.m., we have Catriona Reed, the founder of Culture Sniffers. She will be providing a tour here, so please do come back if you are in the area. Before I pass it over to Matt, who is the Executive Director of the ADAC, just like to say thank you all for being here. I know it's a beautiful day outside, so thank you very much. Matt.
Thank you, Katie, for such provocative questions.
Provocative is a great word for those. A big thank you to Katie, Cailin, Gabby, and Danna for your expertise. The 60th anniversary is about bringing together our community in the art world. Both 52 members are showing here with 104 artworks spanning multiple years, the 1800s to present day. The work is incredible. Please take a look. Please ask questions afterwards. I'm around, Gabby's around. You guys can all stick around if you'd like.
Thank you.
This exhibition is also in support of our ADAC Foundation, which is raising funds for the Avram Isaacs Critical Writing Award, which is a $1,500 award given out biannually to 3 emerging writers across Canada. Writing in Canada is a dying art and we need to revive it, so the ADAC is trying to bring back financial support into that realm. So if you're able to donate, please scan one of the QR codes around. Also, if you're interested in any of the work, proceeds of those sales also go to the foundation. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being interested in the arts. Thank you for supporting the arts. And yeah, congratulations to the 4 of you. Great.